Laurent Saclair. In season 2 of Scientology in the Aftermath, Leah and Paul Haggis were talking about the celebrities that are still in Scientology. And if I understood it well, they were holding these celebrities accountable for not stepping up against Scientology's practices or for not wanting to look into it. Leah also talked about how she didn't do the right thing as a Scientologist, meaning she didn't want to confront what her best friend was telling her about her brother's experience as a Sea Org member at the time, and didn't want to confront what Paul was saying too when he left. Now, I know Leah was asking questions and got punished for it, and I assume the same happened to Paul at some point. The thing I'm unsure about and wanted to ask you is, how much blame or accountability can we give to cult members when they don't look into allegations of abuse or whatnot in their group, or even not speaking out? Isn't this one of the main points of not, quote, owning your mind, quote, as a cult member? I don't want my question to sound like people shouldn't be accountable for what they do. I'm a firm believer in taking responsibility for your actions. My only but is, how does that apply to cult members? Okay, thanks for your question. This is a tough one, and not one that I feel I have solid, stable answers on right now that I can give you that are just going to be, well, this is the perfect answer, and here you go. It's one that this is a topic of blame, shame, responsibility, accountability. These are very, very they're deep concepts, and our understanding of them is based to a great degree on knowledge, wisdom, a self-awareness of what one is doing. Even in law, I think in mens rea is, the intent. You have to have an actual purposeful intent to do a thing in order for it to be punishable by the law. Because if you accidentally do something or did something in an unthinking way, not necessarily a careless way, but in an unpurposeful way, then should you be held accountable for it? Of course, it all depends on what you did and who it affected. And at the end of the day, it really does come down to that. How severe, how damaging, how destructive were your actions? And were those actions a result of, or were those actions informed by your belief set as a cult member, let's say? Can we hold, we go to this, of course, I'm going to bring up, Germany and World War II, because, of course, it's the greatest way to give the extremist example of people, ordinary people, right? Ordinary men, ordinary women, nothing remarkable about them at all. Ordinary children, and how their minds were reformed or changed, were propagandized into, them believing that doing really, really atrocious, awful things, while not necessarily a good thing. They didn't all believe that, killing people or shooting people or destroying people's lives was necessarily a good thing, universally, but it wasn't objectionable. It wasn't bad. It was okay to round up all the Jews and stick them in their own neighborhoods and put armbands on them and segregate them from the rest of society, take away their bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. So when you can manipulate people's minds through controlling the information that's available to them and prioritizing for them what is and isn't important about that news or information, you control them, right? And so can those people then be held responsible for their actions? Well, I think for me right now, as I'm looking at answering this, the way I want to talk about it is I want to say, why do we hold people responsible or accountable for their actions? What is it we seek to accomplish in doing that? Retribution or justice, and reform or change, or we want to cure or make the person no longer in a position or headspace where they know that that's okay. They need to learn a lesson. They need to learn that that's not acceptable behavior, that it's not tolerable, and we won't put up with it. And that's the kind of reform or rehabilitation that you want to create in people. Our prison system, of course, tends to focus almost exclusively on the retribution or payback punishment aspect of that, and very little attention, comparatively or relatively speaking, is actually put on the rehabilitation part. And yet that's really kind of the most important part of what we're trying to accomplish when we're trying to get people to be accountable or take responsibility for what they have done. Is we want them to get into a headspace where they are no longer, going to do those things, where they can be trusted to not do those things anymore. And this goes for everywhere from theft to larceny to murder to, every crime there is. So there's a lot of different opinions about this. I know I'm not going to get universal agreement on what I'm saying right now. There are a lot of people out there who think that it's just about punishment. And it's just about sequestering, people away from society who have proven that they can't play well with others and don't want to, behave or act in a social manner. And there's also the question and problem that there are a certain percentage of the population who will never play well with others and who will never get along with everybody else. But that gets into the bigger, wider, topic of criminality and social reform and the social contract and all that. I'm trying to address this question about cult members. And with cult members, you have people who have been specifically targeted by an individual or group, or an influence mechanism, I guess we could say. Because even if you look at online cults or online cultic activity, you don't find a single individual sometimes behind the whole thing. You find a group collective think, sort of perpetuating a dogma that can radicalize people, and people can be, go all in and go down the rabbit hole on that. So I'm not even saying that it's a specific individual who has radicalized or changed you when you are a cult member, but coercive control and the kind of radicalization that we talk about with cultic thinking or extremist thinking is something that is done to a person. There are causative agents there that have done this to a person. I think the online cult thing gets a bit gray. So I will just sort of park that for a second, because I think that is the subject of a lot more study in the future. Study I want to contribute to in some fashion myself through my studies. So focusing more on the charismatic cult leader model, which is the one we're all mostly familiar with. You have a situation where somebody is, as you said in your question, trying to replace the mind of the follower with their own mind, with their own ideas. They are engaging in reforming the thoughts of their followers and changing the way that their psychology actually works. So you have this causative agent there that does have some degree of responsibility for what's going on. Remember that Charles Manson never killed anybody, never stabbed, shot, killed anyone. And yet he is the infamous guy in prison to, forever until he died, because he was the organizer, the ringleader, the one who put it all together and coerced these people into acts of violence and murder. Now, the women, the kids really, who followed him also went to jail and also paid the price for that. And they should have, right? Because accountability has to be met. And in fact, those people, just as another case study here, when Manson and the family were caught, those girls were completely fine with what they had done. They were not in a headspace where they were at all sorrowful, that they had seen they had done anything wrong in murdering, Sharon Tate and the other things that had happened there. So there was no responsibility being taken by them. So society, of course, moves forward and punishes them by putting them in jail, because it's trying to create a headspace with them of, hey, you did something so antisocial, you can't actually be part of our group, our society anymore, and we have to, get you out of that situation. Now, there is now the reality of those girls growing up in prison and coming to a place where they realized what they had done and came to accept responsibility for. At least they said they did. And let's assume, for the sake of my answering this question, that they were real, that they really heartfelt meant that they did have time and education and distance from Manson, the cult influencer, right, to get their heads back in order, to reassume their earlier personality traits and moral characteristics, and understand that they had done something horrible and awful. Let's just say that was the case. I'm sure that there could be arguments made in these specific instances of, maybe it took them, longer. Maybe there are red flags still. I don't really know. I haven't studied that in that much detail, but I do know that they really did seem to have a change of heart. And that is really where I'm trying to go with this, is that's what you're trying to create with the accountability and the blame and the shame and the punishment, is you're trying to get them to that headspace where they can be trusted to not act that way again. That's the whole point. And if you can get somebody into that headspace, and this happens all the time, former Nazis, former KKK, former extremely violent people, former terrorists have reformed, have changed, have reassumed their earlier pre-cult identity and moral compass, and did regain their humanity. So it can be done. This idea that criminals can't be reformed, that there is no hope. Well, not for everyone. There are a certain percentage of people who will not be reformed, who cannot play well with others. But that is a smaller percentage than the number of people that we have in our prisons, especially here in the United States. So bottom line, where I'm going with this is that, yes, cult members should be held accountable and responsible for their actions, whether, as cult members, whether they were under the influence of another or not, they still engaged in the actions they engaged in. And the purpose of a law or a judicial action is to protect society by sequestering or separating those people from society until those people can be trusted to be part of society again. I think we all know this. I'm just spelling it out clearly so that I'm clear where I'm coming from on this, that's the goal. We want that to happen, and I think that can happen. I think a lot more work could be done and should be done in the area of rehabilitation of criminals that is really given the shortest of shrifts. I can say that with certainty here in the United States. Probably in the rest of the world as well, certainly in India, China, Russia. I mean, these are, the major countries of the world are not engaged in very good rehabilitation efforts when it comes to dealing with the antisocial criminal elements, and when dealing with people who have been the victims of undue influence and coercive control and cultic thought reform techniques. So we got a lot to do here, right? And we do most of the work in the detection and prevention phase, but very, very little. I mean, as little as is being done there on the cult front, and believe me, very little is being done compared to the magnitude of the problem. As little as we're doing there, we're doing almost nothing when it comes to how do we rehabilitate people who have committed criminal acts, end up in prison or behind bars, who have been victims of, who've been part of cults. So it really is kind of bottom of the barrel that we're going to get to these people, and that's a real shame, because there's a lot of good people who have fallen for some really stupid ideas and have ended up doing very stupid things, and they, do get out of that headspace, and they do deserve to get another shot, to get another chance at society, and that's why you see me lamenting that a little bit when I talk about it. So anyway, there you go. I hope that answers your question and at least gives you some food for thought.